So for the past couple of years or so, I've been frequently using Steam's Discovery Queue feature, which gives you a selection of about 12 games that are, in theory, chosen to be presented to you based on the types of games you play. I say in theory because that is complete nonsense, and Steam doesn't really have any clue. It just gives you a bunch of random games, at least in my experience. That being said, it's a pretty useful feature, and it's introduced me to a lot of games that I otherwise wouldn't have noticed. In fact, all the games I've reviewed so far on this channel were found using it. A lot of the time it gives me free-to-play games which, in the past, I've always just skipped, thinking they were just cheap mobile ports, or part of the many generic free-to-play games out there. A couple of months ago, however, I decided to look further into them, and started adding them to my library. In truth, a lot of them are either student projects, prototypes for something larger, or just small projects made by small teams. I ended up downloading quite a lot of them, actually, and I got to the point where I was just filling up more and more space and just never getting around to them. Up until recently, I was on the verge of uninstalling them and just moving on when an idea popped into my mind. Why not make a series of videos reviewing a bunch of these small little free-to-play games? So that's what I'm doing. Making just one video for each wouldn't be a good approach since these games are really small, so it's easier to review a bunch at a time. So to begin with, I'll be doing 6 per video. I don't know how many of these I'm actually going to do, but I figured it would be a fun thing to try out, and considering the ones I've played so far, some of these absolutely deserve way more recognition. These aren't going to be like my usual reviews. They'll be shorter and they won't have a final rating attached to them. I'll be going over what I liked, what I didn't like, and what I think could be improved. That's it. So without further ado, this is episode 1. Let's begin. Airlon, I assume that's how you pronounce it, is a short first-person platformer that has you play as a champion chosen by Nuzion, one of the gods, to compete in a series of challenges. Although you don't see them, there are other champions competing in this contest as well, and the obstacles you are tasked with overcoming are presented in the form of platforming-based puzzles. The story plays an influential part in the game, with multiple characters, each with their own agendas, conversing frequently with each other, and their unique characteristics help set them apart. They're all fully voice acted too, and the voice acting is actually quite good. For the most part, the narrative is done really well, but there were a couple areas that could have been delivered clearer in my opinion. I think this is mainly because the scenes happen through dialogue interfaces where you can't actually see the events play out, so it's not something that really bothered me too much in the end. In terms of gameplay, most of the challenge stems from jumping from one place to another, as well as avoiding any oncoming obstacles heading towards you. I make that sound boring, but it's not, trust me. Mechanics range from sprinting, jumping and sliding, then later on to wall running and climbing. You're even given a bow and arrow that's used to interact with buttons that help you progress forward. As far as controls are concerned, things get a bit slippery, quite literally. The sensitivity is ridiculously high, and as far as I could see, there was no way to actually change it. This made the parkour elements trickier than they should have been. Likewise, the movement isn't always smooth. My character never felt balanced and would often get stuck on things. The wall running mechanic didn't always work either. Aside from those issues, the general gameplay loop is fine. The puzzles aren't complex, but they're fun to solve, and the level design is varied enough to remain interesting. It's just the clunkiness of the controls that hampers it down. On a visual front, the game has a distinctly retro aesthetic, both from a design perspective and in its appearance. The art style, although a bit inconsistent, has an early 2000s feel to it, and I really like it, aside from a few odd models that don't really fit in. The character designs also look pretty good too. Airlon took about half an hour for me to complete, and I enjoyed all of it. My only suggestions for improvement would be to touch up the controls a bit to make it feel smoother. The Creature of Chaos is a fast-paced first-person shooter with an emphasis on procedurally generated level design. You're tasked with shooting through a series of randomized environments and defeating the final boss at the end. The final boss is a dancing skeleton, because reasons. You might think at first glance it doesn't really look like much, and that's fair. The visuals are pretty basic for the most part, aside from the interesting enemy designs. The game takes place inside a garden maze split into multiple rooms that unveil themselves as you progress, which I thought was pretty cool. Where it lacks in visual qualities, however, it absolutely makes up for in both technical achievement and entertainment value. The procedural generation works wonders, making each playthrough feel different from the last without a hitch. In fact, the only bug I experienced at all was getting stuck inside this water pool area early on in my first playthrough, but that's it. It's also just a blast to play. It's not overflowing with content per se, but what's there is fulfilling enough. You start off with a pistol and you'll eventually find a shotgun, both of which are equally useful. On top of these, you can find upgrades to your health and armor that prove to be helpful as the challenge increases the more you progress. They also encourage you to explore a bit, adding more depth to the gameplay. There's also a surprising amount of replayability thrown into the mix too. When you complete your first run, you are given a list of statistics ranging from how long you took, to the amount of kills, to your accuracy, etc. Take the procedural generation into consideration and this game could keep you occupied for a while. Likewise, after finishing your first run, you are given access to 2 new game modes, Arcade and Custom. Arcade gives you a timer that you have to beat, whereas Custom allows you to alter a dozen settings to your liking. Both of these modes are great additions which, again, increase the game's replayability. So overall, I was really impressed with the Creature of Chaos. If I were to give one suggestion on what to add, it would be to simply expand on what's already there. Add more weapons, more power-ups, more enemies, stuff like that. The game is still in early access, though it hasn't received an update in a while. Regardless, I highly recommend checking it out. Revenge of the Killer Octopus, great name by the way, is a third-person shooter where you play as an armed-to-the-teeth octopus with a penchant for violence and explosions. I mean, just look at the footage, this is how action-packed the game is. Your objective is relatively simple. You must escape the military facility by navigating its many rooms in search of 3 keycards. Once all of those are collected, you then must fight your way to an escape route. Not only are you equipped with a multitude of deadly weapons ranging from lasers to rocket launchers, you are also able to swing around the area using your tentacles, increasing your speed and agility. If attached to a human, you are able to take control of them and use them as a meat shield. I just want to say that I really admire the concept that this game has. It's funny and absolutely ludicrous in a way that immediately catches your attention. However, there are plenty of issues with it that need to be ironed out. Firstly is the optimization. It's really bad, especially when loading into new areas. The frame rate drops by half, and while it does eventually go back to normal, it takes some time, and since some rooms are absolutely full to the brim with enemies, lag is a consistent problem. Speaking of enemies, there's way too many of them, and the AI likes to group together and move in a way that's a bit too coordinated. It's quite difficult to survive for that long, even when you're moving around pretty fast, because there's just so much going on that it's hard to keep up. Then there are the bugs. These consist of minor issues like the hit detection occasionally being off and struggling to go upstairs, but then you get the big ones, such as the one that makes your character invisible, with the exception of the weapons. I'm not even sure how this happened, he just disappeared. But since there's no character model, you cannot take damage, so I was immortal throughout the whole thing. That's a bug that might need to be fixed. All of the problems I have mentioned can be fixed with some additional work. Like I said before, the game and the concept are really fun. It has all the components for a great game, it just needs some extra time in the oven. Midnight at Forest is a first-person horror game in the same vein as titles such as Slender. The gameplay follows a similar premise, in that you have to search around the woods for 5 keys in order to unlock a gate that'll allow you to leave the forest. The map is, well, it's a forest, so there's a lot of trees, with the exception of an open road which begins at the campsite, the starting area for the game, and ends at the gate. The map is pretty large, so the only way to find the keys is to follow the game's tracker, which tells you if you're getting closer or not. Then there's the creature that's in the woods with you trying to hunt you down. Or at least, he's supposed to. For my first playthrough I chose the medium difficulty, and I didn't actually see him once. I was able to beat the game without much trouble. For the second playthrough I decided to choose the hardest difficulty, and I ended up pumping into him before the introduction was even over. He also gives you a classic close-up jump scare when he touches you. My only guess as to why I didn't see him on the medium difficulty playthrough is that he was getting stuck on the trees, as that did happen to me a couple of times. What I will say is that the atmosphere is pretty well executed. The game is really dark and uncomfortable to play through. It just needs more polishing. Instead of having just trees, you could have a few landmark locations to add more variety to the level. That way you could get rid of the tracking system and replace it with a map that you can use to navigate the area for places the keys might be in. A promising foundation, nevertheless. Bewildered is another third-person shooter, this time with an emphasis on clearing a corruption that's spread across the land. Assisting you on this endeavour is a guardian, a mighty creature capable of fighting in battle and interacting with the environment. I'll start off by saying I was really impressed with the level design. It's very open, with different pathways to follow, and it's also nice to look at thanks to its cheery and vibrant colours, which is made all the more memorable due to the calming soundtrack that accompanies the game's atmosphere. The aforementioned corruption serves as an effective contrast, and it's hard to miss. The designs for the enemies are good at conveying their sinisterness. Pretty much everything in the visual department is executed to great effect, actually. Likewise, most of the time I enjoyed the combat. It's simple but effective. You are able to shoot a projectile from your hand, which can be charged up to deliver a more powerful attack, and alongside that you have two abilities, Shield and Dash, both of which are fun to use and add complexity to the fights. But then you have the Guardian. Yeah, I'm not entirely sure how this guy got the role of Guardian because, respectfully, I don't really think he's capable of anything. The idea is that you can order him in combat to target specific enemies, but I don't think he ever actually dealt any damage in my playthrough. In fact, it's usually a 50-50 chance as to whether or not he will actually acknowledge the commands you give in the first place, and he often gets stuck behind walls. There wasn't really any combat situation that he had a noticeable impact on. This is a pretty big problem when you consider that this makes up half of the game's combat mechanics. All you have is a lumbering pet that is only occasionally useful. There is another problem though, the apparent lack of focus. I had a hard time knowing what I was supposed to do, aside from defeating an evil pestering the land, and you're not given much guidance either. So I just ended up wandering around the map until I bumped into something interesting. Over time, this became pretty boring, as the combat encounters started to feel the same each time, just with more and more enemies. Despite my initial enjoyment, I never ended up finishing it. I feel like this wouldn't be as big of an issue if the Guardian's AI were more sophisticated. Overall though, it is a fun game with quite a bit of potential, but that potential can't be reached until the Guardian's AI is improved, and with the addition of clearer objective markers. Despite that, Bewildered is a beautiful looking experience that's still worth trying out. Equinox is a third-person adventure game that's filled to the brim with clever game design and a plethora of engaging puzzles. You play as a woman whose duty is to protect a world maintained by the steady flow of water, something that's recently been disrupted by a newly arrived calamity. Even despite the recent troubles, the world is a fantastically stunning place to observe and wander through. Right from the beginning you're immediately hit with the lush landscapes and beautiful sunset colours. This is one of those games where every frame is a painting, and in all honesty it only gets more gorgeous to look at as you progress. As great as the visuals are, it's the gameplay where Equinox absolutely thrives. The world is split into two perspectives, the sun and the moon. The main character lives in the sun world, whereas another character, simply known as the Other, resides in the moon world. How this translates to gameplay though is rather unique, and it's what makes the game shine. Dotted around the levels are these gates where the two worlds converge. Once entered, the game splits in half, showing both perspectives of the player and the other, both of which you control. In order to continue, the player needs to solve puzzles by interacting with various parts of both worlds. So for example, you have a pressure plate in the sun world, but the box is located in the moon world. Objects can only be seen in the world they are located in, which is something you have to keep in mind when figuring out a way around an obstacle. It's a really intelligent concept that easily makes the game stand out, and it's executed perfectly. The difficulty increases dramatically over time, which just makes it all the more memorable, and some of the challenges it throws at you using this two worlds concept do make you think outside of the box. I honestly struggle to fault it. It may be short, but it's presented beautifully, both mechanically and visually. It is without a doubt my favourite game on this list, and I couldn't recommend it highly enough. So that is the end of episode 1. Yes, I am making this episodic because I'm sad and I like numbers, they make things organised. I hope there was at least one game there that caught your eye. I really enjoyed playing through these. It just comes to show the amount of talent that some people have, and to release these games for free on top of all the work that's gone into them, it's commendable, I'll say that. I'll conclude this video by saying that you should keep an eye out for games like this. Be curious about them, they don't cost anything after all. A lot of these are made by people new to the industry and are using these projects as their first foot in the door, so to speak. There's plenty of hidden free-to-play gems on Steam, and it's my hope that this series can help bring these some amount of attention. So if you're interested in seeing more videos like this, then be sure to subscribe. At the moment I mainly make reviews for indie games, but I'm hoping to branch out in the future. I'm still pretty new to this whole YouTube thing, so any feedback is appreciated. If you enjoyed the video though, please give it a thumbs up, as it helps the channel, and until next time, stay safe, bye.